Hi, my name is Annabelle Grace, and today I am presenting The Expensive Wellness: Who Gets to Be Well? Addressing Access to Health with Limited Resources. This presentation is intended to generate awareness and understanding among wellness practitioners and alternative health providers of some of the invisible barriers to health that may be present for a portion of people they work with, as well as for anyone who works with the public in a wellness support role. The info presented here is based on research as well as my own personal experience in working with special populations and as a consumer of healthcare and someone with a chronic condition who understands the economic barriers to adequate health support. I've also drawn upon the insights and many conversations I've had with friends who have shared generously their own struggles with chronic illness and accessing health. By no means is the info presented here comprehensive when it comes to the scope of accessing healthcare. I do not address here the issues of race and gender inequality nor geographical barriers, which are all vital parts of the conversation. Nor do I speak for all people who live with disability or chronic illness. However, I do want to note that when I speak about chronic illness, I am also including mental health conditions. You may also find this useful and supportive if you have a friend or family member who struggles with some of these often invisible barriers, and I do hope you will check out the resources I've included. This project was originally created and presented to my class of fellow teacher trainees who are studying to become reproductive and sexual health educators through Grace of the Moon. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. So I'd like to start with a few definitions, asking the question, who determines what good health is? The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Merriam-Webster defines wellness as the quality or state of being in good health, especially as an actively sought goal. I think words and definitions are really powerful, and I'd like you to keep these in mind as we move through the rest of this presentation in considering who determines what healthy and well mean. Not so long ago, wellness was typically defined by a general state of goodness in life, happiness, a thing practiced holistically and subconsciously, and definitely not a buzzword as prevalent as it is today in our daily verbiage. Wellness was simply being well. Now it is a global industry worth over $3.7 trillion, consisting of juices and cleanses, detoxes, powders, crystals, and potions, mostly priced prohibitively for a limited class of people whose concerns are far beyond simple survival. Quote-unquote wellness experts often capitalize on a growing population of chronically ill people and the failure of the modern healthcare system. It contributes to anxiety and obsession with personal responsibility for health, and puts women especially in a constant battle of self-surveillance and chronic self-critique. This is not empowerment. This is predatory toward those vulnerable and suffering, and often desperate to feel better. Wellness culture tells us that happiness, health, vitality are all within your reach if you just choose to make your health a priority. It is packaged as empowerment, yet does not address underlying systematic structures that create greater barriers for some than others. The message is, if you can't afford to make these choices, you don't get to be well. So the clients we see will all come with varying levels of access to resources, a spectrum of life experiences which will inform the choices they have. Our model client, of course, is someone who has all the resources at their disposal to make the best possible choices for their health. For example, most people do not have an unlimited cash flow, and this may limit what self-care and lifestyle choices are available to them. Health has become an increasingly significant marker of self-control and responsibility. Those who can afford health and wellness, as the media is packaging it, are viewed both by themselves and those around them as socially elite. In this way, health has become the newest and most subversive form of conspicuous consumption, providing the financially elite with overall feelings of well being and supremacy, and simultaneously shaming the impoverished with feelings of constant inadequacy. Hegemony remains unshaken, although it shows itself in a different way. For example, wellness culture creates and propagates fluctuating food rules which define certain foods and behaviors as negative or positive, healthy or unhealthy, toxic or pure. But for those who are struggling to eat, it can generate anxiety, feelings of shame or failure, which are constantly fed by social media and advertising. Throughout cultures and history, food has had a strong link to power and class, to religion and superstition. It has always played a role in differentiating the wealthy and the poor. In the US, we have access to more variety of food and we know more about nutrition than ever before, and yet never has our relationship with food been so complicated and fraught. Food is never just about food. It is always tied up in identity, culture, family, ritual, heritage, traditions, feelings of pleasure, shame, reward, punishment, or survival. In the modern world, food decisions have become increasingly individualistic rather than communal. The phenomenon of customizing our diet rather than simply eating what is available or seasonal is fairly recent and hugely privileged. Lastly, food is extremely political. I believe that how we feel about what we eat and what it represents for us is of equal importance than the actual ingredients in our meal. Knowledge is power when you have the power to make choices. 41 million people in the US live with food insecurity. 23.5 million people live in food deserts, and over 2,000 cities in the US have lead levels as high or higher than Flint, Michigan. For those trying to make socially and environmentally responsible and health-minded choices with limited resources, the grocery store can be paralyzing. Add in any dietary restrictions, and the task of feeding oneself becomes utterly overwhelming. People in poverty are often forced to participate in a system that simultaneously oppresses people groups and or pollutes our bodies and the earth. There can be feelings of self-judgment, shame, or resentment. This creates dissonance within our bodies and disconnection from our food. So I want to talk a little bit about well-intentioned efforts by people, usually in a place of moderate privilege, to help make healthy food accessible, or think that they're helping making food accessible for people who are struggling. And this is just a sample handout, just came from a brainstorming session with some students that I was not a part of, with some ideas on how to make food more affordable. And I want to bring it up because I think this happens a lot. I've given out sheets like this when I've worked at social service agencies. I've had them handed out to me from social service agencies. And unfortunately, I bring it up because a lot of times this can really make people who are struggling feel disconnected from providers. So I'll break this down a little bit. So anyone who's actually struggling with food insecurity, anyone who's been poor for longer than 5 minutes, is not poor because they don't know about buying in bulk, and they don't know about grocery outlets, and they don't know where the cheapest produce is. Most people who are struggling with food insecurity, at least here in the US, are recipients of food stamps, or in California, it's CalFresh. So they are dependent on places that accept EBT. Some farmers markets do, some don't. Some people have farmers markets nearby. Some, in my area, the closest farmers market now that accepts EBT is about half an hour away. CSAs The ones I've looked into cost several $100s up front usually. That's not something that usually people who are struggling have. $300 or $400 or $500 cash up front. Buying in bulk, that usually takes a significant amount of money to buy something in a larger quantity, even if it ends up saving you money in the long run. This also would require driving to multiple places, transportation, transport, perhaps time off of work, free time, the energy to make all of these stops. But more important than that, and I'm skipping over dumpster diving, because once again, I think it's the context and how that might feel depending on what client you're talking to. If you're talking to a mother struggling to feed her kid, it's going to feel a lot different than if you're talking to a young adult or, somebody who just wants to check out the back of Whole Foods and see what they can find. The larger message with a list like this is it feels like someone saying you can get healthy food, but you're just not trying hard enough. And it is possible, but you just have to work 10 times harder than everybody else if you're really committed to your health. This is a tough message to hear, because I know that people that are in privileged positions, it comes from wanting to believe that it's possible. We want to believe that poor people can get healthy food too if they just make the right choices. And what this is saying is it's not that you don't have money, you're just not making the right choices. It's really uncomfortable. It's really disturbing to think that people in your own community, on your own street, people in your social circles might be actually struggling with food insecurity. And there's a lot of shame around it, because the message is that you are supposed to be able to provide for yourself, something as fundamental as food. So depending on your geographical location and the cost of food, here in Sonoma County where I am, it's a big challenge. It's a challenge for a lot of people. And so we need to come up with at least more awareness of the actual barriers in people's way when it comes to accessing food. Next slide. And we can't solve world hunger right now, at least. So what can we do? So I have some suggestions here. First of all, in my line of work, we have an intake form where we get information about clients before we meet with them. One of those is a sample meal journal. We ask about nutrition. So my first suggestion is not to judge a person's commitment level or nutrition education by what choices they are able to make. For example, it's common for parents to skip meals or save the best quality food for their kids when they're dealing with food insecurity. For their kids or other family members, maybe there's other family members they're caring for who might have dietary restrictions or be on a special diet that costs more money. There's also shame attached to not being able to afford organic food. There's shame if it's prepackaged, if it's not from scratch, if someone doesn't have the energy or a flexibility from their work to shop and to cook. Sometimes it's meals that are easier to put together. Ask questions about a client's relationship to the food they eat. This is really important. Asking them what values are important to them when it comes to food. Finding out what the meaning of food is to them, what their history with food is. Having that deeper conversation. Being careful with words like affordable and inexpensive. Don't assume what is affordable to someone else, and understand that the expense of healthy food is more than money. It costs time, it costs transport, it costs preparation. If you've not experienced food scarcity, I encourage you to investigate and challenge yourself to grocery shop with half your usual food budget. And maybe from that experience, you can put together a simple recipe book that's specific to what resources are available in your area with low cost, simple, healthy foods that are locally available and nutrient dense. Another thing we can do is be very, very clear up front about what you offer, what your fees are, and any additional costs. I've had the experience multiple times of practitioners who really, really want to get a client in and send the message, say up front, I think I can help you. I think, this will be a really great fit. And I ask what their fee is. And they say something like, well, just come in, we'll work something out. Or, we can talk about it. There's some options. Something really vague. And then when I show up for the appointment, and I've had other people mention this to me, this has happened to them too. They find out that the fee is quite a bit more than they can afford. And there isn't flexibility, and the practitioner just wanted to get the client in the door. And that's extremely discouraging, and it's disrespectful. So being really clear about what you can offer. Research the highest quality, lowest cost supplements if that's something that you recommend to clients. Consider buying wholesale to offer to clients for cost or for trade. And putting together a list of resources specific to your area. So some areas offer have food banks and local food giveaways. Research CSAs, research low-cost health clinics, but go check them out yourself. Find out what's in the food box that they get every week. Find out how much of that food is actually usable. There's great food bank resources here in Sonoma County. However, because of our dietary restrictions, there's about 60% usually in that box that I can't use. So go find out the quality of food that's being given away. Go find out how much it costs for CSA membership. Do that footwork before you suggest it to your clients. And proofread your social media posts and website for language that sounds preachy, fear-driven, or judgmental. Remember that health is much more than the perfect diet. Another suggestion is to consider adding a screening question on your intake form that could help identify when money is an obstacle to health for a client, such as, what are some of your biggest challenges to supporting your health? Remember that not all clients will disclose that they're struggling to make ends meet or that they're even struggling for food. You may not know how long someone had to scrimp and save to come up with your office visit fee, but you can ask questions that give them the opportunity to share. And keep in mind, the human body is incredible. Just like a plant, it pulls nutrients from far and wide, and it utilizes and transforms every bit for its highest health. Our systems of detox are powerful. And consider that we have not always eaten 3 meals a day with 5 to 7 servings of fruits and veggies. Many groups of people throughout time have lived extremely healthy lives with much less calories and much less variety. So shifting gears a little bit here, I'd like to talk about the privilege of able bodies. And coming back again to the idea of definitions and words, and who defines what able-bodied means and who defines what a disabled body is. Ableism is the discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. My primary care physician said to me, able-bodiedness is a temporary human condition. I like that quote. We have a very limited image of what it means to be healthy, and much of wellness culture and self-care rhetoric are extremely ableist and white. It's estimated that 19.4% of the U.S. population have a disability, 45% have a chronic condition, and yet this is the image we see as an average healthy person. So it's not even an accurate image if almost half of the population have a chronic condition whether it's visible or invisible. It seems like we need to redefine our idea of what healthy and normal is. Capitalism has conditioned us to view our bodies in terms of usefulness and as the means of production. Capitalism has only use for producers and consumers. The cult of wellness seeks to control and fix disabled bodies. Disabled bodies are in opposition to capitalism and productivity. Ableism is the belief that people living with dis-ease can be fixed, and if they just do the right things, they will feel better. There's no room for living with dis-ease, only curing it. You just need to figure out what you're doing wrong and correct it with the right diet, the right supplement, or the right therapy. Living with chronic illness means physical, emotional, and mental resources are extremely measured and calculated. Every task is an expense. If you're not familiar with the spoon theory, I strongly encourage everyone to read it. It's a short essay written by a woman with chronic illness who has this really great way of explaining what it's like to live day to day with physical symptoms that limit your mobility and your energy and what you can accomplish in your day and how measured that energy has to be. I'm going to put a link to it in the sources at the end of this presentation. Every day is different. We have good days and bad days or weeks. Planning ahead is difficult, including meal planning. It's hard to tell if you're going to have the energy from one day to the next to stand at the counter at the end of the day and chop and prepare your vegetables and stand over a stove. Most often at the end of the day, that's not a possibility for me. We are constantly examining, evaluating, scrutinizing our choices in relation to symptoms. There is a tendency to self-blame if we haven't eaten well or done all the right things, even if it wouldn't have made a difference, because the pain still comes. There can be shame around not being able to handle it, especially when it's an invisible illness. There is pressure from the outside world to function like everyone else, though our bodies are not like everyone else's. Chronic illness takes a great emotional toll. It can come with anger, sadness, fear, frustration, loneliness. There can also be joy and pleasure. Feelings are not indicators of whether a person is well or ill. They indicate present experience. Self-care may look very, very different from one person with chronic illness to another. For one person, it might be making a big pot of veggie soup. For another person, it might be forcing themselves to eat a piece of toast because that's all that they can stomach. I'm going to speak to chronic pain because that's my personal experience and have several other friends who that's part of their experience as well. I've heard the quote, "Chronic pain is the inevitable side effect of being alive." No one really escapes it. Eventually, we all have pain. But someone who experiences ongoing significant pain in their daily life exists on a different plane. Even on a good day, the trauma of living with illness remains, and the knowledge that symptoms will return. Chronic pain sufferers are always either managing pain, actively trying to avoid or anticipate pain, or recovering from a painful episode. Everyone has a different relationship with their pain. In my field of work, and for my fellow students, this might show up as a client with PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids, interstitial cystitis, or another related or unrelated illness. Sometimes that's not validated by the medical community or taken as seriously by doctors. A person experiencing a prolonged period of unmitigated pain is in a state of crisis. The body releases cortisol and adrenaline. Brain imaging has shown that chronic pain changes the gray matter in the brain over time. Depression also often coincides with chronic pain. The pain scale is bullshit. Pain scores rise and fall in direct correlation to the amount of support a person feels, how seen they feel, how much they have to perform, how much hope they have, and how empowered they are to access and use effective tools. In short, pain scores rise and fall in relation to their level of resilience, and this may change from day to day. Someone who experiences pain may have a variety of coping strategies, some of which may or may not be ultimately beneficial to their overall health, but must be validated. Examples of this could be using food as medicine, comfort, or reward, caffeine, sugar, alcohol, nicotine. I've used all of these at one point or another. So encouraging supportive choices with sensitivity and compassion. It's also important to talk about the stigma of pharmaceutical medication. So for some, taking medication is what allows them to participate in their life, maintain a job, parent, cook food for themselves, and or get the rest they need. Harmful assumptions about clients who utilize pharmaceutical drugs can be that they are uninformed or uneducated, and if only they just knew better, they would make a different choice. That they want a quick fix instead of healing an underlying cause of illness, that they just haven't tried hard enough, or tried enough coconut oil, or turmeric, or yoga, etc., etc. Or that they must have deeper spiritual or emotional wounds. Just like food, medication means different things to the different people who take it. Most everyone who has lived with chronic illness is not happy about taking medication. Most everyone who has lived with chronic illness has tried more remedies than you can count. Many homeopathic or natural therapies or treatments require a significant investment of time and money that not everyone has, unfortunately. We do not live in a culture that creates space, options, or choices for bodies that cannot be commodified. I myself use a variety of natural alternative medications or herbs or remedies. I also take pharmaceutical medication. I have at times in the past hidden that or not disclosed that on intake forms when I've worked with alternative medicine practitioners or with healers because of fear of judgment. For me, it's not a controversial issue. It is what allows me to care for my child and to get to my job and to support us and to get up and down my stairs and to get up in the morning and to have some quality of life when nothing else works. There has to be room for people to make the choices that best support them. And it doesn't mean that they're not aware of side effects or they're not aware of ingredients or they haven't weighed all of the other options that are available to them. Natural medicine and pharmaceuticals can coexist as part of a holistic plan for health. When people advise us to do more exercise or to eat more leafy greens or to try yoga instead of taking medication, it feels like they are saying we're simply not trying hard enough, that we would be fine if we just pulled ourselves together and helped ourselves. This goes along with the stigma of being a victim. We hate when people play the victim. There is this message, don't be a victim, don't sound like a victim, don't complain, don't take the easy way out. And this is a harmful attitude. So when faced with this attitude, taking medication feels like admitting defeat. Since we should seemingly be able to manage it ourselves, we must have failed if we take medication. This self-stigma is dangerous. People don't seek treatment believing that they just need to be stronger and get on with things. Inevitably, This means they often become more and more ill. If we do start taking medication, we might feel that we need to hide it from others or try to get off it too quickly because we're ashamed that we need to take it at all. How to be an ally to someone with chronic pain or illness. First off, validate their experience. Extend compassion, not sympathy. Check in with about pain level when you're together. Be aware, or let them know that you're aware that that's something that they struggle with. Ask how the last few days have been with pain and ask what they have energy for. Someone who's just spent 4 days with muscle spasms or lying in bed is going to have a very different energy level than somebody who's had 3 great days with minimal pain. Give permission for them to care for themselves in your time together. That means letting someone know it's okay to get up and move around, or it's okay for them to ask to change position or take a break if they need to. Let them talk about their illness if they need to. Ask questions to understand. A lot of people don't get to talk about the reality of what it's like. They don't want to be a downer. They don't want to make people feel bad for them. They don't want to sound like a victim, God forbid. And it also, it makes people feel helpless when you hear somebody who's struggling with pain day after day after day, and it's hard to know how to help. Eventually, those people end up keeping it to themselves. And that causes a tremendous amount of isolation and loneliness and the feeling that no one really understands your reality when you're carrying it alone. So let them talk. Ask questions. Be intentional and aware of the language you use around choices in medical treatment and medication. Avoid making moral statements or judgments. You are not in their body. Don't try and fix. Don't start in with a list of have you tried this or have you tried that, unless they ask you. Remember that small, empowering changes can yield powerful results. Acknowledge the daily courage it takes to live with chronic illness or pain. So living with less resources at your disposal, such as in poverty or with chronic illness, means you're doing constant calculations. For every task or expense you have to pull from somewhere and rearrange, reassess, and reprioritize. Sometimes you have to do that all day, multiple times a day. Sometimes there is nowhere to pull from. We must have all our strength in place to counter the systems which, without our ability to resist and transform, without the self-preservation Audre Lorde describes, would see us destroyed. Sometimes self-preservation takes all day. So a few words about self-care versus community care. The self-care rhetoric is it's up to you to make sure your needs are met. Preaching self-care can be a way to blame an individual for their own suffering while ignoring societal, systemic issues that keep that person suffering. Understand that self-care is only a thing because of capitalism and the commodification of our bodies. Self-care becomes a thing we do so that we can show up for others, keep producing, keep performing, and keep earning. And I have this quote here by Abeni Jones. As long as self-care is discussed as an individual responsibility and additional task, it will be something that middle-class people with leisure time will most easily relate to and will include barriers to the lives of the people without time to spare. It becomes one more unchecked box on a to-do list to feel bad about an unreal expectation, or a far-off dream. Community care. So on the other end of the spectrum, we have independence as an illusion and the remembering that we are interdependent beings. We are only as vital as the most vulnerable members of our communities. Focus on building reciprocal, supportive, mutual serving relationships and collaborations. Creating a network of other providers who do complementary work, who may offer reduced fee services or occasional pro bono work. When and if you are able, consider offering sliding scale sessions, trade, or gift economy clinics. Making food communal again. Sharing with family and friends, potlucks, taking food to your neighbors. It's one way to reclaim community space. And build new relationships, expand your circle of care. Re-envisioning a different model of care, community care, takes some creativity, but this is the direction that we need to go in, moving away from keeping people in isolation and expecting them to meet their own needs. What exactly are we left with if we do not know how to care for ourselves? What if mental illness, depression, anxiety, or otherwise renders us unable to care for ourselves? What of survival then? When we are sent links that say, I can see you're in need of care, so take care of that on your own. What then? What are we left with in a time of need when we are alone and expected to heal in isolation? Individual wellness is critical if we are to play a role in dismantling systemic oppression, but wellness is not holistic unless it acknowledges and addresses the places and people who do not have access or who are suffering for the commodification of wellness. So this is adapted from Susan Weed's writing, The Wise Woman Way. I call it the Wisdom Way. So we live in a society with an illness anxiety disorder consisting of excessive worry that we are or may become seriously ill at any time. I believe that this cult of wellness is a way to feel a sense of control over our lives and stems from fear of death and aging. It is the premise that if we do all the right things, we will be protected from disease, and separating ourselves out from others who do not may give us a false sense of security and safety. We have to be able to educate, empower, and counter the overwhelming din of wellness culture telling us that we aren't enough, we don't have enough, and will always need to try harder. And if we are suffering, we are not yet trying hard enough. I'd like to propose that the obstacles themselves can lead us to wellness and wholeness, that true healing is a journey to find our own medicine, that there is not one medicine fits all, and that small empowering choices can be deeply meaningful and even more impactful than expensive diets, regimens, or treatments. All of the nutrition and the basic health and the rest and the exercise and the fresh air and what we put in our bodies and what we surround ourselves with, all of that is important, and we need to support everyone to be able to have those basic tenets of health. However, perhaps our definition of health and wellness need to change. Unless we look at who is left out of wellness spaces, our work as health care providers and practitioners is not truly holistic. The way we feel and think about our bodies and the messages we internalize, what support we have, and how empowered we feel to make choices that nourish us have everything to do with holistic wellness. It is a radical idea that we can live well with dis-ease. It is a radical idea to be healthy and have a disability. How we feel about our choices is the key to living well. So what is holistic health care? I've included this quote by Yasna Maya Padamsi. I cannot sit and care for my body without being concerned with what happens to the bodies of my sisters. We are connected. It is our responsibility, not as individuals, but as communities, to create structures in which self-care changes to community care, in which we are cared for and able to care for others. The definition of wholeness I found was the state of forming a complete and harmonious whole, or unity. So if wholeness equals connection, and health equals soundness in body, mind, and spirit, holistic health care then must be caring for body, mind, and spirit in connection to all things. Our definition of health and wellness need to shift. Our work as healthcare providers must include whole people, whole communities, whole societies, and whole earth. We get to decide, you get to decide what whole looks like for you. Who gets to be whole? Do you get to be whole? For those of us who are living with barriers to health, who are in some ways victims of an unfair system that may deny us adequate care or value or right to thrive, those feelings are valid. And what do we do with those feelings? Some of us are living proof that capitalism and individualistic society does not work, and we can choose to embody the idea that health only belongs to a few, or we can challenge it, we can rise, and we can prove that we will thrive anyway. So the question is, where can you take back your power? Who gets to be well? I hope that this presentation will spark more thought and more discussions on how we approach health and wellness, on how you decide what wholeness and health looks like for you in your body, in the context of your life, in the context of your community. And I hope that we will start to envision a more complete system of care, moving into community care, moving away from isolation and more into connection. Thank you for your time and attention. I've appreciated it, appreciated being able to share. It's been a very empowering project for me to work on personally. I've included some sources here and further reading that I highly recommend. Amy Redding's essay, Commodified Wellness, The Power of Perceived Well-Being, is excellent, as well as Johanna Hedva's Sick Woman Theory. Highly recommend that, and Christine Miserandino's The Spoon Theory. I also have some resources here on community care. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to send me feedback or share, feel free to contact me, leave a comment, and let me know if this was helpful to you. Thank you so much.